Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I'm thrilled we have Illinois author Christine Sneed here with her new book. It's called Paris, He Said. You'll love this one. If you love Paris, if you love art, if you love a story about great relationships, this is the one for you. Christine, welcome to Anderson's in Naperville.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here, Becky.
Oh my God, it's great to have you here. We love your books, and it's so great to have you here for the new one. So this book has been out a little over 2 months, Paris, He Said. So tell us a little about what are you hearing from friends and colleagues and just your readers that are reading this new one? What are you hearing so far?
You know, I am so glad that on the whole, people have been really supportive and enthusiastic. And I mean, I worried, my father even said, he's like, you're writing about Paris. You know, do you really have the guts to do that? Because it's obviously a city that so many people have such a romantic and personal attachment to, and also so many writers have written about Paris. But you know, I was a French major in college, and I wanted to write about the country and also a city that I felt very strongly about. And you know, I think people who might have thought, oh, this is going to be a romance novel, have been pleasantly surprised that there are certainly a lot of romantic elements,
right,
but there's also a lot of serious thematic, I guess, contemplation of ambition and what it means to be an artist. And also, I mean, of course, like who Jane, the main character, who she becomes through the course of the novel.
Right, right. And it's sort of a growing up novel in a way. Not that it's a coming of age, but it's sort of, you know, and we'll talk about it a little bit further in our conversation, but I found her evolution very interesting, you know, and what happens to her too. So your two previous novels won a lot of accolades. You won a lot of different stuff about the Society of Midland Authors. You won and some other things. Is it hard to sit down after you've gotten a lot of attention that way and that sort of those kind of honors to sit down and write another one? It's a little daunting sometimes. And knowing that you've already got two published works, you know, those books out there, doing the third. I mean, or is it you just sit down, there's that story that you have to tell?
Well, when Little Known Facts was out in 2013, and then last May when it won the Society of Midland Authors Adult Fiction Prize, I was already into the second or third draft of Paris, He Said.
Oh, okay.
So Bloomsbury had bought Paris, He Said along with a story collection in July of 2013, so about 5 months after Little Known Facts was published, they acquired those two manuscripts. And I do think about the fact that I hope I can pull it off, you know, with a new book.
Sure. Yeah.
And it is somewhat daunting to think, you know, that probably each time I publish a new book, if I'm fortunate enough to keep publishing books, the critics potentially will be, you know, more critical, and also maybe less likely to be like, oh, we'll give her a good review this time, but next time just wait. I mean, I think there is some fear on a lot of writers' parts that if their first or second books were big successes, that they're not going to be able to pull it off again.
Right.
But the writing is what I mean, I love writing, so that's what I try to remind myself.
Yeah.
And generally, I think I'm able to focus on that more than the possibilities of what will happen when a new book comes out.
Right. So for Paris, He Said, where did those little seeds, where did those seeds come from for this story? What elements brought this in? And a little bit about the characters, whether it's Jane or it's, please correct my French pronunciations of anything. Laurent, is it?
Great, yeah, okay. Laurent, yeah.
But his character, very fascinating, and their chemistry together and their relationship, very complicated in many ways. But where did the seeds start to grow for this? Because obviously, your love of Paris and having had a lot of experience in France and in that beautiful city. But where did the seeds come from?
I have written about May-December romances in past fiction stories, short stories in particular, but also in Little Known Facts there's definitely a May-December romance with Ren Ivins, the focal character who's in his 50s, and then a young female character named Elise, who's in her mid-20s. So I think, well, I'm very interested in romantic relationships and what draws people together, and also what creates conflict within that relationship. So I knew that I wanted to write about an older man and a younger woman again, and as I did in as I mentioned, Little Known Facts. But I also wanted art to be a big part of it. I used to work at the School of the Art Institute, and I have a number of friends who are artists, and I think I just wanted to write about fine art. I mean, I mean, again, it's sort of like having the gall to write about Paris. How dare I take on a topic like, painting or fine art? But I think I was trying to puzzle out my own thoughts about
Sure.
the creative process.
Yeah. Well, I think you're too. I think a lot of your books and your characters, art is whether it's art in visual expression or whether it's acting or Hollywood or whatever it is. I think the art's in expressing yourself in one way or another. It's sort of a character itself in some of your previous books too.
It's certainly a theme, again, like the May-December romance, or what, again, complicates a relationship between a young man and an older woman, or vice versa. I think it's fascinating to me anyway. In working at the School of the Art Institute and having access to the Art Institute itself for 5 years, I just had a tremendous respect for people who leap into the unknown and try to make art.
And so Jane, is she part you, or is she part sort of the people that you got to know at the Art Institute, or that sort of thing? Because she really is such an interesting character, and I love the way she, like you talk about how she is in college, and we are all that to a certain extent when we're in college and we're looking at the future, or what we envision what we will have, what we'll be doing, and then reality sort of strikes and things change. But where is Jane coming from?
I'd say, there definitely are aspects of my own personality in her, but I try not to write autobiographical fiction, and also I try not to base characters on people I know. I admire writers who can do that, and I think a lot of fiction writers do often write about experiences that they've had or they've been told have happened to other people, that maybe family members. But she definitely is an amalgam of I guess the people's artistic impulses that I observed. And I had a longtime boyfriend who I lived with for 6 years who was also an artist, and when we met, I was working at the school, the Art Institute, and he was a student there. An older student, I should say that. We're only a year apart in age, but no May-December romance in that case. And I just lived with him and observed his creative process and his messy studio. And I just had, as I said not too long ago, I just have a lot of respect for people who are artists. And he's a very gifted realist painter, but he also can do abstract work. And Susan Kraut, who's a character in the novel, who's a real person, who actually teaches at the School of the Art Institute.
So that is a real person.
Yeah. Yes, I visited her studio when I was writing the book, and the paintings that I describe in there as hers are actually her real paintings.
Yeah.
And it was just so much fun to write about her and her work.
And working about her work, and she does some incredible things in her art. But how did she feel about being a character and being herself? How did she feel how you portrayed her in the book?
She was so generous, and she's also a serious reader, so I was lucky that she'd already read my 2 previous books, and so she knew that I would do my best to write her in a truthful way, and that I would do my best to write also as well as I could, and that she wouldn't be embarrassed to be included in the novel. That was one of my primary objectives, that she would be like, I'm happy to be in your book. And so that I just admire her and her work so much that when I realized I needed to put a character in the novel who would serve as a mentor to Jane, I thought, well, why not include Susan? That she ended up, being a very good fit.
And Susan is a teacher herself too.
She's been at the School of the Art Institute for 30 years as a painting professor.
Wow. So that relationship between Jane and Susan is very interesting too. So the initial reaction of Jane about her, and
she worships her. Jane was so happy that Susan was really an early champion of her talents, and she needed that. But of course, there were years where she wasn't making much work. So when she eventually was able to go back to making paintings and living as an artist, it's obviously Susan she comes in more forcefully in the end of the last section of the book, but it was just a lot of fun to have her, both of them interacting.
That one real person in the book. And, So Laurent, and is it Molaire, or how I'm not saying it right.
That's great, yeah.
Is it? Okay,
yeah.
I'm just guessing. But he's a gallery owner, and he sort of takes Jane under his wing, but in many different ways. And it's a very interesting relationship, you talk about that May to December sort of relationship, but also, he's sort of a mentor, he's a patron, he's sort of, in a little Svengali, maybe. I don't know, it depends on how you want to interpret it, right? But also, so he's her lover, but also it's a very interesting relationship, but also he, Paris, he said, so come to Paris and I will,
He's, I realized someone said to me early, I can't remember who it was, that, oh, this is a fairy tale, basically. And I think the novelist Robin Black, who reviewed the book for the New York Times, said the same thing. It's a fairy tale to some extent, but then, of course, what's really important in the book is ambition and Jane's relationship with her own artistic drive and her desires to be someone, not just the mistress or the protege of someone like Laurent Moller, who was, wealthy and just has had all the advantages, basically. So I think, Jane just has this opportunity to go and takes advantage of the situation in a way that she sort of feels comfortable with, and that's where a lot of the conflict, as you know, comes from between her desires and Laurent's desires, and also what she feels comfortable accepting from him, which changes throughout the book.
And we don't want to give any spoilers.
No, I won't tell what happens.
No, don't give any spoilers. But, okay. So you talked about this book. It is about relationships. It's about romance, but also too, I think it's the romance of Parisian culture, French culture. I mean, it's sort of that canvas, sort of as the backdrop of this book. So it's a character itself in this book. So tell us a little about your experience. Of course, you majored in French when you were in your undergraduate, but also your time in France and Paris, and if you did any extra research.
I did.
And that would have been really fun research.
Yes, it was.
So tell us a little bit about how Paris is really a character in this book, because it's so much about the culture, but it's those differences between what we experience here in the United States. Yeah.
I was about to turn 20 when I was arriving in France for my junior year in college, and I lived in Libertyville. I grew up in a suburb near Naperville, or not too close, but not too far away either.
Right.
And that was the first time I'd left. Actually, no, I went to the Caribbean the summer before I went to France, but I had not really done any extensive traveling before I went abroad for that junior year. And I was actually in Strasbourg, but I visited Paris probably 6 or 7 times that year, or very close to that. I mean, it was probably about a half dozen times. And then I went back several times after that year abroad, which was in the early 90s. And I having studied the language for 10 years too, France continues to occupy a big part of my, I guess, sort of emotional life and my creative life. And French film and French literature, I really respect French culture, I guess you could say. And so that when I was working on Paris, he said, I tried, I didn't want it to be just cliched sort of picture postcards of the usual sites that people see in the Eiffel Tower and Arc de Triomphe and things like that. So it was a kind of a challenge for me as a writer to write about a city that's, as I said before, so chronicled and such a symbol of, all the great things that, like fine art and beauty and food, and I think it was sort of a task that I set for myself, but I also wanted to enjoy Paris, as sort of a voyeur, even though I'd been there, but writing about it, you definitely see things differently when you try to write them, put them down on the page.
And we feel sort of a voyeur when we're reading this, and sort of on the relationships or what's happening in what's, but also I think we feel sort of like a tourist, in the way you're writing about this city and manner, food, just the culture itself and fashion and all these different things that make up Paris. So it was kind of a little tour book in a way too.
It's so colorful. Yeah. I mean, there's just so much beauty there, and even in the winter when things are much grayer, there's still, the buildings themselves look like they're like pastries. The detail on the facades of a lot of them are magnificent, and it's just it's like a poem in architecture. I love it.
So you put a lot of French words into the text of this, and you sprinkle it in. I thought added a lot to it. So did that come naturally, just to put in those French words here and there, or phrases?
It definitely did, and there were actually more in there in other drafts, but my editor and I discussed this at length about how much should I translate on the page, what maybe things should be said in English instead of in French, but there did have to be French in there because there are French characters, obviously, who are interacting with Jane, especially in the homes of French people. They're going to be speaking French, so I really had to balance the the fact that it would be irritating for some readers who know almost no or no French at all, and those who do know French and would be particularly sensitive to the fact that these characters are going to be speaking French, and why are they speaking English here?
Right.
So it took some work. I mean, Nancy and I, my editor, we did have to put our heads together more than a few times. It just maybe clashed, not really, in a very tactful way.
No, it had to be in there, in my opinion. It really did, to get
good.
that
I'm glad you
flavor,
thought
and
so.
that you had to have it in there. So, the difference between, and you look at Laurent's and Jane's, Laurent, I never
No,
pronounce
that's
it.
good. Yeah, that's
Their
good.
relationship, and how, he's basically, they're lovers, but also when they get to Paris, it's going to be more an open relationship. Don't ask any questions, that sort of thing. And the differences between, American culture and French culture and manner and what is okay and what is not okay is kind of apparent. And describe a little bit of that you've encountered, even in your time in France, too.
Oh, that was definitely what I think I was thinking about as I was writing this, especially the luncheon that happens about 2/3 of the way through the first section, when she goes to Jean-Lucie, who's Laurent's grown daughter, for lunch at her house. And there are very distinct roles. I mean, in I guess within the family, and my host mother in Strasbourg always did the cooking. Her husband Dominique was working, and he would not have done dishes or anything like that. I mean, it's probably different in other families, and that this was more than 20 years ago.
Right, sure.
Also, Americans are uptight in the sense that I know that I was worried, what's going to be in this dish, and will I be able to eat it? And the French learn from an early age. There's a great book by Pamela Druckerman, Bringing Up Bébé, which came out a few years ago. It's so interesting, and she talks a lot about how the French managed to train their children basically from infancy to eat everything on their plate. And Americans, no. I mean, my mother, if I said I don't want onions, that was the end of the conversation. I didn't have to eat onions. So I was very sensitive, and my host mother in Strasbourg was also very particular about her toilette, and cared about what she wore all the time, and it was a point of pride, whereas I think we're a lot more casual, and we'll disclose things about ourselves that the French would not disclose casually.
Right, which is so interesting. So now, when you sit down, and I always ask every author this too, is do you outline? And I know you teach writing, so I will ask you a question later about what do you wish you knew when you were beginning to write that you now teach your students? But do you outline, or is it point of maybe just a very broad strokes, and then you're surprising yourself as you write the story, as we are when we're reading? So tell us what that process works like for you.
It's usually I don't outline that much. I will. The thing is, though, like when I sold Paris, he said I sold it based on the first 100 pages, and then I had to write a very detailed outline in order to get Bloomsbury to invest in the book. But I ended up not following that outline at all. So. And that's in part because my editor and I worked closely, and I just rewrote the first draft almost entirely. So the second draft was almost a completely different book. And one thing too that I tell my students is they get real tripped up by, this has to be perfect, right away. And it's impossible to write a draft usually, especially a novel that is flawless. It's just, but I'm teaching short stories. I mean, to my writers, even my grad students, some of them work on novels, but a lot of them work on short pieces. They just have to sort of trust in their own instincts, and not be so rigid that they refuse to let any light in or any surprises. I mean, for me, it definitely has worked that I have been able to write stories, especially that I never outline those, but I just have fun. I mean, I try to enjoy it, because that's the only joy that you're going to have reliably is the joy that you have at your desk.
Well, and that has to be related to us as readers, that what you've experienced when you were writing it initially. I think that's essential.
Certainly. I mean, there's I don't know who said it. No tears for the reader, then no tears for the writer. Well, no joy for the writer, no joy for the reader.
Yeah, sure. So I hear you write poetry. I was reading. So how does that writing of poetry inform your writing of fiction?
Well, I was in graduate school when I was getting an MFA, Master in Fine Arts and Creative Writing. I was a poetry MFA, so I wasn't really writing a lot of fiction. Okay. And I don't write a lot of poetry now, but certainly having had a foundation in poetry writing and reading made me, I think, more sensitive to language and to sort of the lyrical aspects of fiction, and wanting to write a sentence that has musical qualities is important to me. And having, written a lot of poetry when I was first writing seriously about 20 years ago, I still think about that a lot when I'm writing fiction. And if something sounds flat, then I know there's probably not enough poetry or enough interesting language in there. And with Paris, he said, my editor, and I definitely I just tried very hard to write good sentences, one after the other, and it was hard. I mean, especially for 330 pages.
Oh, I know.
But I also, I mean, anything I'm writing is prose. I still want it to have poetic qualities,
and it does show that craft you put.
Thank you.
It.
Thank
but
you.
I was just wondering if your undergraduate degree in French, and French is such a gorgeous language. Does that sort of that lyrical quality of what French sounds like, does that inform, or it did inform your poetry writing, and then now informs your fiction writing too?
I would say it certainly, it definitely did, and just writers who I admire, like Alice Munro, she's not poetic in the way that someone like Scott Spencer or John Updike is, but there's still this immense respect for language and the surprises of language that appear in her. She always finds the perfect word, and that's what I'm hoping to do every time I sit down to write.
Right. No, that's great. So, Jane, she's one of those characters where you sympathize with her. You see what's happening to her. She feels like she's in this relationship where she feels somewhat guilt. She feels beholding, but in some other ways. But also she's lacking in that self-confidence about her own artistic talent and what she can do. But then in some ways, sometimes you don't like her, and it's not because it's some of the things that she does or whatever. But did you write her that on purpose to make her that kind of a character where she has, just like the way most of us are?
I definitely wanted her to seem real. I mean, she, it's funny because a lot of people have said that they either really sympathize with her or they find her really frustrating because how could she be so stupid? Can't she see what's going on? Why is Laurent able to take advantage of her? And I just thought, I think a lot of times we just make decisions that we blindly hope will turn out better than we probably think they will. And I don't see her as selfish, really. I think, no one's really said that they think she's selfish. They just think she's sort of naive. And there is some naivete there, but I think she's just hopeful. And also her situation in New York is so hand to mouth. I mean, not like she's going to soup kitchens, but she's working 2 jobs and not much left over for fun things. And so when he offers her this golden ticket, I would have taken it if I were in her shoes.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
so
and to go to Paris too. I mean, it's incredible. But to have this art patron, I mean, who really has successful galleries in both New York City and Paris, who wouldn't take the chance?
Especially because she's a struggling young woman who isn't painting very much, but has talent and is afraid of the tough work that she'd have to do to make to get a break in New York.
Right. But it's so interesting, the choices. It's interesting the choices we choose, and then what comes of those, and the many roles that we play with other people in those choices. It's so interesting of that. I want to know about the cover. Was this your decision? And did you get a choice of any, but because it really is really striking cover.
Oh, it's, Bloomsbury is so, they just make the book is a beautiful object. I have to say, like in retrospect, I don't know if I would want the woman on the cover, but because I think it conveys a message that this is sort of a dreamy romantic novel, and there are aspects of that, but there's so much in it that is not about the sort of fairy tale being swept off your feet. But I mean, the book itself, I think they did a great job.
So you teach at University of Illinois down in Champaign-Urbana, but you also teach at Northwestern at the Graduate School for Writing. So
yes.
Tell us a little bit about those experiences. I think you've done some stuff at DePaul, too.
I taught at DePaul for 12 years.
And you live in Evanston.
Yes.
Yeah,
the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign position is a temporary visiting assistant professorship, so it will end in May 2016. And Northwestern, I've been teaching there. Most of the writing faculty are part-time, except for the people who are embedded in the English department. So I I've been teaching for Northwestern since 2012, and most of the fiction faculty, we just teach one class a year. And then but I'm also an admissions, I'm the admissions person who goes and does information sessions for them as well, a few times a year.
Yeah.
And I read the applications too.
Okay.
But it's, it's actually really good. I like the structure of having the teaching in my life to go with the writing.
Yeah.
It helps me sort of plan my time better, I think.
Yeah, no, I think I can totally see that. So you do, I read that you do Skype with book groups, which is very cool. Are you still doing some of those?
I mean, I most of the visits that I've done have been in person, just from contacts in Evanston and friends in the area. But I have done Skype talks, and I've talked to classes who read my books at schools, colleges as well, and. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do a book club Skype if people are interested. It would be fun.
They have good French wine when you go, right?
right, and I'll have a glass on my my end too.
Yeah. So tell us what you're working on now.
I am in the midst of writing sort of the first draft of a novel that I recently started, and working on some short stories. But the novel that I started is it's tentatively titled The Following Year, and it begins on the day when the main character signs divorce papers and sends them off, and what that year after is like for her. So, but it's very new. I hope I can pull it off. We'll see.
Oh, I'm sure you can. So there was something I read about 3-word titles. So The Following Year, of course, that's an article.
You're right. It's so funny.
No,
it's true.
But it's true. But it's funny. You do see those. It's sort of a trend, or I don't know.
I think it was my agent. Whose name is Lisa, who's also Ann Patchett's agent, and a number of other writers she represents very well. She said, yes, 3-word titles are, for some reason, are very much in vogue. And I don't know if it's just for literary fiction or what exactly, but...
Right. So what do you hope readers will take away when they read Paris, he said?
I hope they will feel connected to the characters. And I got a lovely email through my website a couple days ago from a reader who said, I haven't felt that connected to a place or to characters in a long time. And I thought, that's the perfect letter. I mean, any writer would love to get a letter like that. And I mean, that's what I hope. I think I want people to feel like these characters come alive in their imaginations, and also that they can see Paris, physically, if not going there in person at some. I hope to go back in the next year. I don't know when, but I'd love to do it again.
Okay, so at the end of these interviews, I do a little quiz. So it's a lightning round. Most of these are book related.
Oh no!
No, you know all the answers.
Okay.
So whatever comes to mind first. So, what was your favorite book when you were young?
Oh, it was definitely Charlotte's Web.
How about something when you were studying French? Maybe a novel in French or a poem that you absolutely loved.
We read some of Swann's Way in French, and I remember at the time feeling like Proust was just impenetrable, and I was 20, so I didn't know anything about who he was yet, but as an adult I look back on that and I loved. Proust is someone that a lot of writers talk about, but I'm glad that I read him in French first.
Okay, and what are you reading now, or something you've read recently that you absolutely loved?
Charles Finch wrote this really good novel, The Last Enchantments, and he's known for the Charles Lennox mysteries, but he and I are just met recently because he moderated the Lit Fest panel, and I'm doing an event with him later this summer, and he's just a really fun, smart, generous writer and person.
He is. Well, 100%. Good score. All right.
Oh,
A+.
thank you.
Okay. Well, Christine, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me, and congratulations on Paris.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed our talk so much, and it was really my pleasure.
Great conversation with Evanston author Christine Sneed about her new novel. It's called Paris, He Said. You'll love this one for many reasons, and it's not just Paris. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.